Good evening, everyone. Thanks for being out here. My name is Ryder Smith. I have a firm called Prescriptive Smith. We do marketing, communication, and public affairs work, and we've been working with Izzy and the team at the City of Poway on this project and to help bring together tonight. My job is really, you're not going to hear very much from me, hopefully. My job is to carry this microphone around and facilitate some conversation and get your questions answered tonight. So a couple little house details. We'll go to the first slide that we got for this evening. Whoa, Tiger. There we go. I'm very slide dependent here, Izzy. So first of all, a couple things to note. We are broadcasting this evening, so there are about 10 or so folks at least on Zoom that are watching tonight. It's one of the reasons to be in a great council chamber like this. By the way, one of the best council chambers I've been in. It's a very nice council chamber. Congratulations to the residents of Poway. So that's one reason we want to make sure we use microphones this evening, and why I just want you to hold comments or questions until I get to you with a microphone. I'm going to hold it pretty close to your mouth because they tell me this is one of those ones you almost have to eat. So I'll get it close to your mouth, and we'll get your questions asked to make sure the folks at home can hear it on Zoom. For the folks at home on Zoom, where chat is enabled, but hang on, you got to go back to my slide there. You're going to hand me, buddy. For the folks home at Zoom, you're going to stay muted the whole time, but we have the chat enabled for you to ask questions and things like that. I think that pretty much covers it. Otherwise, we're going to have a great discourse this evening. Okay, thank you. Now we can go. And I think we got a slide up here for our folks at home so that they can actually see how they can use the chat features to be able to engage with us and communicate. So communicate away, our friends back in chat land. And then as we're taking questions, so we're going to do about 30 minutes of presentation this evening and hear from our panelists. And then after we get through our 30 minutes, then we'll go into the Q&A. So just bear with us through that initial presentation. I'd appreciate it. Go to the next slide. So for our agenda this evening, we're going to start with some brief introductions. And then we're going to, two of the logistical items I should just note. One, we do have some food and snacks and water, so make sure you have a full belly for the conversation. And number two, restrooms are out to the left if you need to use the restroom. So additionally, we're going to get through our project information tonight. Then we're going to go through what we call our tree removal methodology that was implemented. We'll have some discussion about the environmental protection steps that were being deployed by the city to carry out this project. And then we'd like to talk about the future and the future of the city when it regards to this particular project. And then we'll get into your Q&A. One other thing I just want to say is these days, kind of after COVID, it's caused, I oftentimes find myself with the opportunity to be in front of a crowd and have a microphone, and I like to take 30 seconds to capture a moment of something to be thankful for, and I think this is maybe a consequence of COVID in my world. And tonight, I want to say something odd, but I want to be thankful for the global positioning system. So the global positioning system is about 1,300 satellites that are currently in geosynchronous orbit around Earth, and they are what enables us to have pinpoint precision and some of the maps that you see tonight, and what is a really impressive GIS implementation for you all to zoom in on these maps, and I hope you had a chance to talk to staff. That GPS system actually can get, within some instruments, down to a couple millimeters of variance located on Earth, which is absolutely amazing. So just think about the capabilities of that and what makes possible some of these incredible maps and all the detailed inventory that was done by the experts that helped pull this project together. It's very impressive. So thank you to the inventors of GPS, funded by our friends in the federal government. Now, part of Space Force, of all things. Okay, so introductions. As I said, I'm Ryder. We're joined by Izzy, who's with the city, works in the Public Works Department, and this is a project he's been shepherding along, so he's our city nerd. And then we have Michael. Michael is with West Coast Arborists. They're a contract services provider for the city, providing tree trimming services in the city, as well as their expertise on trees. Mike is also an arborist, so that is a strong designation, basically indicating his expertise on trees. And I'm sure many of you have encountered arborists in the course, so he's Mr. Tree tonight. He's a tree nerd. Then we have Brock joining us this evening. He's from a firm called Dudek. They're another consultant to the city. Their expertise is in environmental issues, and so they provide the environmental consulting work on this entire project. So for me tonight, he's our environmental nerd. And then we have Tony joining us this evening, and she's a resident in the community. I would call you the resident nerd, but I don't want to cause offense. So I will just say, yeah, she's involved with the Lighting and Landscape District on the citizen side and has really strong resident insights on that we're going to hear from as well. And so with that, Izzy, I want to hand it off to you to lead us through, and we're going to get through our panel for about 30 minutes here, and then we'll get to our questions. So thanks.
Great. Thank you, Ryder. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this evening on behalf of the project team. We're really excited to share with you and walk through with you this project and get your questions and concerns. For those of you who are not familiar with the project, this project began the planning stages at the end of 2018. We submitted our application to FEMA in the March of 2019. And November of 2020, just last year, we received notification of award of grant funding. And so we're really excited that we were able to get $1.4 million from FEMA to conduct this project, and match with a 25% match of city funds, so approximately $500,000. This evening, I'm going to provide a high-level overview of the project. I'll go over project schedule, cost, and the various project locations. Before I begin delving into the overview of the project, it's important to understand why we're conducting this project. So first and foremost, the project seeks to reduce wildfire risk within the community. As many of you know, there's in California, wildfire season is no longer, within the months of October, late fall. It's pretty much year-round. And if you were here in 2003 and 2007, you remember the Cedar Fire and the Witch Creek Fire, which, by the way, this month marks the 18th and 14th anniversary of those fires. So first and foremost, reducing wildfire mitigation. Secondly, this project seeks to protect evacuation routes. So Espola Road, Twin Peaks Road, those are critical evacuation routes. Each of those corridors see about anywhere from 30 to 45,000 annual daily trips. And so protecting the evacuation routes by removing hazardous trees that could potentially block those routes during a wildfire. What we're trying to prevent is a situation that occurred in the town of Paradise in 2018 with the Camp Fire. A lot of their evacuation routes were blocked. So lastly, this project seeks to protect our natural resources. We have, I'll go over a particular area called the Green Valley Open Space, where there's a lot of native trees being overran by invasive trees. So we want to protect those natural resources as well as balancing public safety. If we take a look at the project summary, as you can see, the three project locations, Espola Road, and Twin Peaks Road. You can see on the screen the red shaded areas. Those are the very high fire hazard areas. So again, this is where the evacuation routes come into play. I mentioned the funding already, $1.9 million total project cost with a 25% match of the city. This project has three locations, and these three locations this whole project can pretty much be summarized in three phases. So the first phase, which we just recently completed, is identifying hazardous trees and assessing trees. So earlier this year, the city contracted with a certified arborist, West Coast arborist, with Michael here, sitting next to me, oversaw that project. And in total, we assessed a little bit over 6,400 trees within the three project locations. And we identified a little over 2,500 trees recommended for removal within the project locations. And you'll see a little bit more as we progress in the slides how they apply to each of the various project locations. Our second phase is environmental permitting, and Brock, our third speaker this evening, will discuss those requirements. But before we start removing any trees, there's certain regulatory requirements that we need to meet before we can remove one single tree. And by the time he's done speaking, you'll understand kind of the deep process that we have to go through. And then lastly, the tree removal process. So once we go through the permitting process and the various agencies clear us for that work, we can begin work, and we'll go over that timeline later in the slides. So our first location, again, the various locations are in no order of importance. They're all important, but for the matter of sequence, Twin Peaks Road. The project boundaries are essentially from Pomerado Road to Midland Road. We're addressing both sides of the corridor, north and south side. This corridor had a little bit over 2,000 trees assessed, and the trees that we assessed were trees that are 4 inches in diameter or higher. As you know, for those of you that live in the corridor, there are a lot of volunteer trees, a lot of small trees. Those trees will be addressed, but for the purposes of the assessment, we only did 4 inches in diameter or higher. Of those 2,100 trees, we had a little bit over 400 that were recommended for removal. And the project the removal actually consists of within the public right-of-way, so on city property, and also in this area known as a prescriptive easement, which is primarily affected the north of Twin Peaks Road. So properties that are adjacent to Twin Peaks Road on the north side, there is a prescriptive easement, and the city has been communicating with those residents with regards to obtaining a right of entry agreement. Cooperation from those residents is integral for the success of this project. So if you're in this crowd tonight or at home listening, and you live adjacent to Twin Peaks, please get in touch with staff, and we can address your questions with regards to the right of entry agreement. As you know, for those of you that live or travel along Twin Peaks, this corridor is primarily has eucalyptus trees, and eucalyptus trees are non-native to California. Eucalyptus trees are notably hazardous because they're highly flammable, and you know, for those of you who travel along the corridor, know how messy they can be, which can produce or add to a fuel fire. Our second location is Espola Road, and the project boundaries are from Val Verde to just south of Titan Way. This corridor had about 1,100 trees assessed and approximately 150 trees that are recommended for removal. As you can see on the map, the dots that are red, yellow, and orange, those signify trees that were assessed as not healthy, hazardous, which Mike will go over kind of the criteria for those recommendations. This corridor, the work in this corridor will primarily be work within the right-of-ways, so on city property. This corridor does not have the prescriptive easement issue as Twin Peaks Road does, so it's a pretty much straightforward project boundary location. Our next project location is the Green Valley open space. And this area here is a little less defined, but essentially the site boundaries include on the north side, Wilderness Road, Summer Sage Road. On the south, it's bordered by Rock Creek Road and Summer Sage Road. And on the east side, Espola Road, and on the west, Oak Creek Trail, Lake Poway Road, and Prairie Vista Road. This open space area here has predominantly most of the trees that we assessed in the project, with approximately over 3,000 trees assessed and close to 1,900 trees recommended for removal. Work in this area will consist of tree removals, tree trimming, vegetation removal, and will primarily be focused along the project boundaries, so the peripheries, the border of, within the borders, staging areas, and access routes. And that sums up the 3 project locations. Our project schedule, as I mentioned earlier, this is a 3-year project, and we are currently wrapping up, or we just finished, excuse me, the assessment and identification of the hazardous trees. We are currently in the process of getting through the environmental permitting, the environmental permits. And as I mentioned, Brock will go over the various requirements for that process. We have a deadline of February 2022 to get through that process. In the meantime, at the end of this year, beginning of early next, around January timeframe, we'll be beginning the bid or procurement process to get a contract on board to do the tree removals with an award, in the spring of 2022. We're looking at summer of 2022 as a project start commencement date. It's important to keep a note that this schedule is highly dependent on the regulatory permit process, and if there's any delays in getting those permits, that will delay the start of the commencement project. But is the city staff, is the city's goal to address the permits as efficient as possible. So that sums up the project at a very high level. Next, I will hand it off to Michael Pallett from West Coast Arborists, who will discuss the tree removal methodology.
I take that. Aim over there. Okay. One direction. Okay. So yeah, I'm with West Coast Arborists. We're a tree maintenance contractor that actually maintains trees for about 300 public agencies in California. I've been working with the City of Poway for quite a long time, and I'm happy to be up here to provide some expertise in regards to the decision-making behind why trees have to come out. So in the case of this project, we were asked to go and assess the areas that Izzy just went over in detail with you all. And that's exactly what we did. Certified arborist staff went out and looked at the current inventory. The city does have an existing tree inventory database that has been in place for quite some time, and it was just a matter of going through it, re-verifying the condition and updating what we saw out there, and really focusing in on removal criteria that met the objective of what this grant was all about. So basically, we identified trees that had overhead spacing issues, and I'll kind of review these a little bit further, but trees that just didn't make sense from an overhead spacing criteria, along with considerations of fuel ladder, which is one of the criteria for this grant. Dead trees, fairly obvious as to what a dead tree is. Disease declining. There's a lot of issues with pests combined with drought that are happening specifically to the eucalyptus trees. I'm going to highlight that here in a few minutes, but we looked at that closer and analyzed whether or not these trees, some of them, are they in a condition that they're not going to recover out of that, or are they beyond the point of recovery and making a decision that perhaps these should be removals. We looked at the structure of the trees, evaluating the structure. Are they viable from a structural standpoint? Seedling or volunteer, pretty common, especially in the Green Valley open space. You have that riparian creek habitat, a lot of things in there that bird goes in, takes a crap, if you will. A lot of things come from that end up developing and causing non-native problems. So including the crowding out of the natives, which Izzy alluded to. And then poorly spaced trees, there's a lot of spacing issues that are of concern. Trees too close to properties, trees too close to other trees. There's a lot of factors that went into that decision making. And then the other overall aspect that we evaluated is that, in nature, something called a monoculture fails. So what we mean by monoculture is a singular species tends to have issues in its viability. There's just one tree gets one problem and it transfers to others. A good blocking of that, if you will, is species diversity. So when we evaluated, Twin Peaks, for example, there's a ton of the same tree all in the same area, and it's just, you can see the symptom of the problem of that, what we call monoculture, existing as it does. So that was the basic criteria. Again, certified arborists went out and did this evaluation, and I have some photos to kind of go over to illustrate some of what we saw out there. And I keep pressing the wrong button. So here's some examples of trees that are poorly structured. And as you can see in the photo on the, that one, it's kind of hard from looking at that picture back there. The photo on the upper left, if you will, that's codominant stems is what we call that. It's just poor structure. You can see that seam running down. There's a likelihood of failure involving in a tree like that. It's one of the things as arborists that we evaluate for a potential removal candidate. And just you can see some of the nature of the other photo pictures there. You got the leaning tree, potential target impacts. You got the bad structure of the branch that has some dead stuff there with the resprouting of new growth on dead is not ideal. The picture on the bottom left, you got, in order to keep the sidewalk good, some cuts that had to be made to the roots, and just the overall structure of those are good examples to highlight as to the criteria for a poor structured tree for removal. Others, spacing criteria, you look at just the overall, how close that is to that property line on the picture on the left, close to infrastructure, the potential to damage infrastructure is there with photo on the right, and, again, just too close to properties there. So these are all parts of that criteria for evaluation for that category of poorly structured. Dead tree, fairly obvious. You do have a pest problem, a variety of pest problems that are causing issues in these areas, including there's a pest called the lerpsillid, which is a bug that helps defoliate the leaves. I know I was talking to, I think, somebody earlier about the leaf mess that they are dealing with in their backyards. That's actually due to an insect infestation that's combined with drought. So the tree sheds its leaves because of that particular pest. But it does cause a lot of mortality and death in eucalyptus trees specifically. This is an example of combination of factors in this particular tree. This is poor structure. You have multiple stems arising from a stump like that, or from a lower bole area like that, combined with fungal pathogens. And what the nature of fungus is it eats healthy tissue. It's consuming it, and so between the structural problems combined with the fungal pathogen, this is a disease declining, poor structured tree that again met that criteria for a removal candidate. I mentioned invasive, voluntary bird crap trees. Mexican fan palms is a prime example of that, and Green Valley Open Space has quite a bit of that inside there. I believe there's about 700 or so that we identified that just are not native. They definitely outcompete the native. They put on these long, what we call skirts, these excess old frond bases that are persistent. They'll stay on, and they can be pretty flammable, to be honest with you, when it comes to fuel management. These are the ones that in the winds they fly like flaming discs in the winds, and they can fly for quite long distances. So definitely good for the fuel side of reduction, and also from the invasive side for rehabilitating natives. Mexican fan palms shouldn't be there. I mentioned pest issues, and as you can see on the photo on the left, there's just a variety of things that go after eucalyptus. Those spots on that leaf there, that's actually the lerpsillid that I had previously mentioned. Oftentimes they're white spots. These are older ones that have accumulated sooty mold on them. But those, if you lifted up that white spot, there's a little tiny bug in there that's actually sucking on the leaf. And it actually helps to defoliate the tree and helps to put it in decline. The other big bug on the other leaf there is what's causing those galleries in the middle photo. So it actually bores into the tree. It's a Eucalyptus longhorn borer, puts its pupa into the trunk of the tree. The larvae chew up the tree, and again, just overall kills the tree. The photo on the right is actually a new pest. There's a lot of statistics on pests in Southern California. There's a new exotic pest introduced to Southern California every 45 days. So they have a voracious appetite, and this specific one is the invasive shot-hole borer, ISHB. Pretty nasty bug that was brought here from Asia, and it has a crazy appetite for a lot of trees, but it's been found in the Green Valley Open Space, and it's another culprit for killing trees in that area that met this criteria. Summarizes me.
Okay. I think I'll have to. Pardon? Oh, okay. Right. You have to get pretty close to the microphone here and lean over a little bit, I think. So I'm with DUDEC, and we were tasked with evaluating the environmental effects of the project. So there's this slide behind me shows all the things that we are going to be doing related to this project to evaluate the biological and other environmental issues surrounding it, if any. So the first task one thing actually that's not on here is we used drones to collect aerial imagery of the Green Valley area because the existing aerial photography wasn't really high resolution enough to be able to see what was kind of going on there. That's an area that has a wide variety of tree species and vegetation communities sort of intertwined, and so getting the updated aerial was very helpful to us. You can see the resolution of the palm trees there on the figure. So beyond that, kind of the first thing that we were tasked to do was develop a vegetation map of all three of the sites. We did that using aerial photography and then also visiting the site on ground, and developed a vegetation map that also helped us perform a habitat assessment for a variety of potentially occurring special status species. At the same time, we performed a review of jurisdictional resources that may be present in the area. So those are wetland resources that a few different agencies would be concerned with. All that's going to be wrapped up into a biological resources report that will assist the environmental documentation that needs to occur for this project. Right now, we're sort of evaluating what type of environmental document would be required. By that I mean which document would be required under CEQA, or the California Environmental Quality Act, or NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And then after that, we would also be determining what types of resource agency regulation, any permits, if any, would be required. Finally, once construction starts, or tree removal begins, we would be available to assist with any biological monitoring that's needed to make sure things go well on the biological front. So these are the regulatory agencies that we are evaluating. There's a whole lot of regulations here that we need to check the boxes off on. The first one is the Fish and Wildlife Service. So for that one, we are paying attention to the Endangered Species Act and seeing if there are any species present, any potential for species to occur within the study area. The other one is the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. That's another one that will come into play in the project as things proceed. Second group here is the California Department of Fish and Wildlife. They deal with both endangered species at the state level and wetland regulations. And so on the endangered species side, if there were species that were listed at the state level, we would get an incidental take permit. The other consideration would be streambed alteration agreements related to wetlands on site. And then finally, they do have other regulations that are similar to the Migratory Bird Treaty Act within the Fish and Game Code that we need to pay attention to. The third, and really, the fourth, are the Army Corps of Engineers and the Regional Water Quality Control Board. They also deal with wetland regulations, and so we're looking at those to see if any of their jurisdictional areas occur here and if permitting would be required for them. And then finally, FEMA. So we've already gone through our vegetation mapping exercise, and we've gone down the road of speaking with the regulatory agencies. And so based off that, for the Twin Peaks and Espola Road areas, those, as has been discussed, primarily eucalyptus. There's also vegetation land cover categories such as developed or ornamental that occur within that area. There are no regulatory concerns within the Twin Peaks and Espola Road areas. The only issue that we would need to be concerned with would be Migratory Bird Treaty Act, so nesting bird issues, and those are relatively easy to overcome by performing the work outside the nesting bird season, or having monitoring occur if work does need to occur during the breeding bird season. Green Valley area is, as you all probably know, is a much more diverse area. So there's eucalyptus, there's palms, there's native oaks, so there's oak riparian forest, there's other riparian areas in there. Additionally, there is a blue line, well, not a blue line, but there's a jurisdictional incised drainage that runs through it. So in the figure behind me, can't really see maybe you can make out the lines, but the lines indicate the vegetation community distribution. The blue is the distribution of the jurisdictional areas with a buffer applied. So that, based off of our conversations with the regulatory agencies, as long as we avoid impacting the drainage area, so that blue line that you see there, the incised drainage area, and any of the riparian areas, then we're good to go. We don't need to pursue any permitting. That's a good thing because permitting can be expensive and take a long time. So we're really working hard to try to avoid impacts to those stream areas. There are no listed species concerns in this area. And really for this area, the only thing we'd need to do would be to make sure that we're not impacting the wetlands while we're doing the work, and we'll be working together to make sure that that happens, and then also avoid any nesting birds. Really pretty straightforward so far on our end.
So I'm a member of the Landscape Maintenance District Advisory Group, and we are a group of volunteer residents that live in both of the landscape maintenance districts along Twin Peaks Road and Espola Road. The LMDs, which is short for Landscape Maintenance District, were established in the 1980s, and they're a designated area of homes that have financial responsibility for maintaining the common area landscaping, in a way sort of like an HOA. And we did a pretty good job of that, or were able to do a pretty good job of that until about 20 years ago. And due to a lot of factors over the last 20 years, including increasing costs of water and labor for maintenance, the aging irrigation system, the drought, and not the least of which is the growing and multiplying trees in the Landscape Maintenance District, the LMDs haven't been able to keep up with the maintenance in the area. So our group of neighbors is concerned about the overgrowth, health, and fire safety of the trees along the two roadways, as well as the lost landscaping at our neighborhood entrances from both Twin Peaks and Espola Road. I don't know if some of you have lived here more than 20 years. You probably remember when there was nice landscaping entering our communities, our neighborhoods. So we've been working with the city for close to 3 years to find a path forward that would allow us to address the safety and maintenance and rehabilitation of the lost landscaping and the trees. So this grant that these three before me have described today is really a big first step and a success towards bringing the trees under control and back to a place where the landscape maintenance districts can feasibly and financially maintain them in the future. We really applaud the city, our group applauds the city for pursuing the grant and providing the required local funding match. From our perspective, the advisory group's perspective, tree removal will go a long way toward making the LMD landscaping and maintenance more sustainable in the future. Whoops. So while the hazardous tree removal project is underway, we're also planning for the future with the city, in collaboration with the city. The advisory group is also working with the city to prepare a landscape master plan for the LMDs, including funding strategies for the potential rehabilitation of LMD landscaping. An opinion survey and open houses on the landscape master plan are scheduled for early next year through the spring. So we encourage all of you to sign up on our information list out in the lobby so that we can shoot you an email to let you know when those things are coming up. And meanwhile, if you want to know anything else about the landscape maintenance districts, learn more about our efforts, ask questions of our volunteers, many of whom are here, and offer your thoughts, be sure to stop by our table back there after the meeting and talk to us, and again, sign up on our sheet. We also have a website. The web address is up there on the slide, and an email address, so you can contact us to get more information.
All righty. Thank you, nerds. Okay, so just to clarify too, so we actually had 2 sign-up sheets, I think, out there, right? We have one on the right-hand side as you go out, which is a sign-up sheet with the city, just to let us know you're here. What's it for? Oh, yeah, for emergency cert. And then we have the folks on that from the LMD on the left-hand side out there. So sign up to your heart's content. We love the community engagement. It's great, by the way. I just want to say, compliment you all. Thank you for coming out tonight. It's an excellent turnout. Okay, so just like in 2nd grade, we just raise our hand when we got a question. So I would encourage you, if you have a question of our panel of experts up here, we would love to get your question answered. Who's got a question? All right, thank you for kicking it off for us. I'm going to hold the mic.
Okay, my question to Michael Palat is, when you evaluated the condition of the trees, did you consider, for example, along Twin Peaks Road, there are a number of trees that are leaning toward the road, and in some cases leaning over the road, and appear to those of us that drive up and down Twin Peaks every day as trees that could, in fact, fall during or after a major rainstorm. And it seems like one of the criteria that you hopefully used was, are there trees that create a safety issue for the people that live in the surrounding area and drive along that road? Was that a criterion that you used?
Yeah, no, we definitely evaluated that as part of the criteria. One of the things to understand is a little biology on trees. So when you have trees that grow in groves like that, there's a lot of competition for sunlight, and there's a biological thing that occurs where it's called phototropism. So it's literally the trees growing towards the light because of competition with other canopies. So some of those trees that are indeed growing out over weren't necessarily hazardous. When we evaluate that, we evaluate the potential of it heaving out of the ground as part of that criteria. There could be some mitigation pruning, and I know pruning is also part of this plan to address some of that. But there may have been some trees that, yeah, met the criteria based on the degree of lean and the degree of potential heaving out of the ground as part of that consideration. But some of those trees that are growing out over, again, it's due to the competition of the growth habit. And there's some mitigation pruning to do reduction cuts that could alleviate some of that stuff.
Great starter question. Thank you.
Yes, my name is Julio, and I live on Wood Creek and Twin Peaks. And sometimes I see people working on Twin Peaks, especially on the south side, well, even the north side. I see them working in an area, and I figure, well, probably they're going to come all the way on Twin Peaks. And they finish that area and make bags of the stuff that they pick up, and they're gone and never come back. So I just want to know, is there a section that you pick once a month, or how does it work?
And these folks are trimming trees. Is that correct? That's the work they're doing.
Yeah. Yes. Well, basically, yeah. Or cleaning up. Yeah, I see you even got volunteers at one time, and they went one time, and that was it.
Okay. So
yeah, I'll take that question. Yes.
Yeah.
So the 83-1, the landscape maintenance district in which you reside in, has a service level of known as service level C. So landscape maintenance contractors there within the corridor, there once a month cleaning. If you have any particular specific issues or concerns, we have staff in the back that can address your specific question. But kind of as Tony alluded to earlier, the landscape maintenance districts are having a challenge in their funding because the assessments have been static for a number of years, over 20 years. And so as the cost for landscape maintenance has increased, our service levels, unfortunately, had not been able to keep up with that. So we had to reduce the service levels. But for your area, it's once a month. And again, if you have any particular questions or concerns with regards to the work in that area, we have staff in the back that can answer those questions.
Hang on. Let me do.
I would suspect that those are volunteers that are working on Twin Peaks on the site.
Yes, to address your second part, we do have volunteers that work within the corridor led by Councilmember Dave Gresh, and then if you live in 86-1, Councilmember Barry Leonard sometimes organizes some cleanups, so you'll see those efforts happen from time to time.
Just a question on, and I'm going to guess that it would be considered a volunteer tree, which are the new little eucalyptus that are coming up in many areas. So to avoid those from growing even, further or to become a problem like our existing trees, are we going to have those removed?
Yeah, so for volunteer trees, our approach is to address them as more maintenance. So there is a plan to address the volunteer trees. I believe some work might be currently being conducted to address the volunteer trees. Again, those are essentially 4 inches in diameter or lower. But Twin Peaks, if you live in that area, as you know, there are a lot of volunteers.
I was just, assuming that those would be completely removed to avoid having this problem another 20 years, because they're gonna grow and they're gonna grow fast. And so at this point, the cost of removing a tree that's small versus a tree that's already grown, to its limit and growing even more, it's probably a lot less cost to remove something like that at this time.
You're correct, and we are addressing the volunteers.
All right. You really got it rolling with the questions tonight. Good job.
I have a question on, in the past, when they cut a tree down, they leave the stump. And in the future, when they cut all these trees down, are they going to leave the stumps, or are they going to do the stump removal with it?
So for Twin Peaks, the Twin Peaks corridor and Espola Road corridor, the work will consist of removing the stumps. For Green Valley, that area is a little bit more sensitive. I believe we're going to leave the stumps in place to keep the soil and prevent erosion from occurring.
Have stumps too? It looks like Stumpville part of the way down there. So.
For which area?
Twin Peaks going down there, there's like 50 stumps in a row.
So, yeah, I'll have to get back to you on that question, but for this particular project, the scope of work includes stump removal.
Yeah, just a quick question on funding. If I understand correctly, the identification of the hazardous trees has already been taken place. Next steps ultimately is the removal of the trees. Is the $1.9 million that you mentioned, Izzy, going to cover all of the costs of the project, or is there more money to be raised?
A great question. So if you recall, we have a little bit over 3,000 trees recommended for removals at an average cost of about $1,100 a tree. There's clearly not enough funding to address all the recommended removals. We'll have to see what the bids come in at and determine how many trees we can remove and prioritize those trees. But the delta that may exist, we'll have to reevaluate where we're at when we remove the trees and develop a plan to address those trees that remain.
So I have a couple of questions. I noticed you have July as a start date. Now, I think we all know that the fire danger gets extremely greater during the summer months. So do you have an approach to this that would allow us to continue working this open space during Santa Ana's and other times when the fire danger is extreme?
A great question. So, there is a possibility to work within the bird nesting season, as Brock mentioned, if we have bird monitoring in place, depending on how quick we can get the environmental approvals, I guess I should say, instead of permits, the environmental permit approvals in place, that start date can fluctuate and can be sooner than that. But to answer your question, yes, there's a possibility to start work earlier than that. It's really dependent on the environmental approvals.
So will you work during these extreme fire conditions, or will you have to stop working for fear you're going to start a wildfire?
We'll start the project as soon as we can, so regardless of what time frame within the year.
So my next question has to do with the way these oak trees grow. They leave large branches dead in the middle of them. Will you be pruning those out?
The work does include tree trimming and tree pruning, but to address your earlier question with regards to a high fire season, if there is high winds, we would stop work during that period, and I will defer to our arboristry and tree contractor for that specific for those specific details.
Okay, then I'm going to stop after this one, so you won't have to listen to me anymore. So we all know that fan palms and eucalyptus and poison oak and sumac are very flammable, and they also come back almost as soon as you trim them out. What do you do in addressing those issues?
I can at least speak to the palm. So palms are unique because they're different than trees. If you cut below the heart of a palm, it doesn't resprout. What you'll get is volunteer seedlings, but the actual palm, once it's cut below the heart, it no longer sprouts. So as far as those are concerned, those should be addressed primarily, and then there will be some residual seed resprout that may occur, but those trees themselves would be done after they're cut.
Yeah, sorry, I have some questions here too. So real quick, our friends on Zoom. I want to make sure they feel like they're not being ignored. So let me at least get through a couple of questions from our friends on Zoom. So first question: what will happen with the trees that are cut down? Will they be mulched in case the residents would like mulch?
Yeah, we can make some mulch available, and I know I've been talking to Izzy about the potential of salvaging some of the wood itself for urban wood utilization. So there may be an opportunity to do something with the wood itself as well in some cases.
Yeah. Okay. So I know West Coast Arbors, you guys have a whole program around wood recycling and kind of urban forest renewal projects and whatnot. So one way or the other, it's not going to go to waste. I think the trick is to avoid the landfill first and foremost. All right, a second question I have here, what will the plan be for replacement? Will another type of tree be planted?
Yeah, so as part of the landscape master plan that Tony was referring to, there is a plan in place to replant or revegetize that corridor with more quote-unquote responsible trees, trees that are I guess less impacted by wildfires and better diversity. Yes, thanks, Mike.
Okay. I assume that the ability to, I'll ask a follow-up question. Our ability to actually do that, though, is contingent upon funding of the lighting and landscape districts?
Yes, that is correct. The landscape master plan is a plan at the moment. Cooperation from residents is imperative. However, opportunities for that engagement, as Tony referred, will be available starting March or spring of next year.
And Tony, you guys are involved in developing that master plan, right? Yeah. Okay. Another question here. This one we may not have an answer for, but we'll give it a shot. It's an interesting point. What percentage of water will be saved when the trees are removed? The kind of follow-up comment was trying to balance the increased water costs with tree removal and getting residents to recognize kind of the economic balance between these points with the landscape maintenance district. Do we have any sense of that?
Yeah, very broadly, just because we're removing trees doesn't necessarily equate to reduce water. I know that doesn't really compute, but the plan is, again, to revegetize the corridors and replant the corridors, so those trees will use water. And then that would be both for both the Espola and Twin Peaks corridor. If we're planning more drought-tolerant water, Obviously, there could be some savings there, but pretty much, the landscape maintenance district and the assessments itself, are also dependent on labor costs and landscape maintenance, as well as the tree maintenance. So those are some static costs there as well.
Okay. And then a question here about prescriptive easement. So this person has lived on Treecrest Street, north side of Twin Peaks Road for 23 years. They just found out that there is a prescriptive easement behind their home. Was this always the case, and who will maintain these trees after the project is complete?
So the city will maintain the trees, and the city has been maintaining trees within the prescriptive easement. I encourage that resident to get a hold of staff at the Public Works Department if they have any more questions regarding the right of entry agreement. We're happy to meet with them at their particular address if they are concerned with regards to any specific trees within the prescriptive easement, happy to work with that resident.
Okay. There's a question here that's which has a presumption in it, which I would also just want to explore, which the question fundamentally is, what are the plans to remediate the damaged landscaping after removal of 3,000 trees? So maybe the first question I would ask is, what damaged landscaping may actually exist as a result of removing trees before we then worry about remediating the damaged landscape?
There's going to be some impacts, obviously, so we'll do our best to mitigate that and try and do our felling operations in areas that reduce that damage to landscape, if that answers that.
And I would assume that...
There's a follow-up.
Oh, sorry, yeah, please.
From the Landscape Maintenance District Advisory Committee's perspective, the landscaping is already damaged, and we've lost the landscaping from the drought and the overgrown trees that have dumped their acidic leaves on it, and lack of watering, inability to pay for watering, that kind of thing. And so that is the purpose of the Landscape Master Plan project that we're working on in collaboration with the city, is to come up with the concepts for what this could look like in the future if we can get more stable funding and get the trees under control. So we really encourage everybody in the public, as we get into early next year and have those concepts available to look at and review, to participate in that process.
Probably just add one thing. It's not landscaping, but it's the native vegetation within the Green Valley area. There's going to have to be controls on making sure that when they're removing the trees, that like oaks are not being trimmed or injured. Some of the other riparian species in there will have to be protected as well. And so the overall integrity of the natural part of Green Valley will remain intact.
Quick follow-on question that had come up here a little bit later, but is appropriate now. Is the Green Valley open space city property or private property?
So the Green Valley open space area is public or open space, and it belongs to the city.
Okay, thank you. And then another question, is there a process to allow questions or challenges to a few of the individual trees that are marked for removal in the Green Valley open space zone? In other words, if somebody has a question about why certain trees be done, or if they want to say, hey, I think it's baloney that this tree is being taken out, like it's got a problem, is there any method to, is there a process to mitigate that, or to at least ask questions?
Definitely an ability, opportunity to ask questions. You mentioned our comment about our GIS. We have every tree identified and the reason why that tree was identified for recommended for removal. So we'll be able to tell you why that tree was marked.
So many in the room here had access to seeing some GIS maps that we have in the back. These maps we're looking at are actually available to the public, right? These maps we're looking at here?
They are currently not.
Okay, so these details are not, sorry, my misinterpretation. So we have detailed maps that are available to come look at here as a resource, and we can, if we have some detailed maps, we can somehow give people some access to some information, or they can discuss it with us?
Yes, so I would encourage them to contact the Public Works Department. Happy to walk through with them the maps. Our goal is to eventually, provide access to those maps that are just not available at the moment.
Right. I think they're fresh, to say the least. Okay. Yeah, sorry, I just want to make sure. Okay. All right, to my friends on Zoom, we'll come back to some of your additional questions here because we got several here too. Actually, this gentleman hadn't had a chance yet to ask this question, so I want to spread the love here. I'll hang on to the mic. That's okay.
Yuri Boland, thank you very much. This has been an excellent presentation. I appreciate all the speakers. I've actually learned some new things this evening. And I had a question regarding what percentage of the removed trees will be replaced by safer alternatives, and what type of trees are they? Thank you.
Thanks for the feedback on the meeting, by the way.
Yeah, Yuri, that's a great question. I don't have an answer to that at the moment. That'll be addressed through the landscape master plan process.
Real quick, is the grant, is that time bound and therefore schedule sensitive?
Yes and no. So, you know, there was a timeline there for, I think, February 2022. You know, we're racing to meet that timeline. That's in regards to our regulatory permitting approvals. So, you know, if we can get approvals before then we can move on to the next phase. So it's, you know, both within the 36-month timeline, it's flexible, but beyond that, it's not. You know, we have to complete the project within 36 months, so that puts us at November 2023.
That's what I wanted to get out there, was that 36-month.
So we have an interest in moving with appropriate pacing.
Why was Green Valley included in the project, as it doesn't directly border an exit route like the other two areas?
Yeah, great question. So, you know, this area, this is an area that the city has been concerned with for a couple of years. It's unlike our other open space areas. It's highly, it has a lot of trees and a lot of compacted trees. So, from an open space area, it's unique in the city, and given that there's a lot of homes in and around that open space area, that's particularly one of the reasons why it was spotted and included in this grant.
All right, before I go to my round two questions, I want to stick with my round one's opportunities. I don't think you've had a chance to ask a question yet.
Ryan, I had a couple of questions. Over on Twin Peaks by Lake Poway Road and Trailwind, there's some massive, really big trees there. And that's not an $1,100 tree. So how do you guys determine the sequence to say, well, that tree should come out before this tree, when this tree might cost you 10 times what it costs the other one? And then my second question is, when the plan is put in place, do you know where you're going to start? Are you going to start on Twin Peaks? You're going to start on Espola? I would assume Green Valley might be after the main exit routes, but have you given that some thought?
Yeah, so we are still in the planning phase with regards to determining which areas and which trees to be implemented or executed. First, we're focused on bidding the project out and getting those figures back. In the meantime, you know, for Green Valley, obviously there's it covers 16 acres. We'll be working with DUDEC to develop a plan on which areas to address first, the high priority areas. But you know, with regards to each of the project sites, so Twin Peaks, Espola, and Twin Peaks, Espola, and Green Valley, we don't have a particular priority at the moment.
I can answer Barry Leonard's question. If you were asking about the huge eucalyptus trees, those at one time were considered for heritage designation when we were a tree city. And as a matter of fact, I still have a question. Are we still a tree city? You can answer that later. But, you know, those are major trees. We're looking at loss of windbreak here in some of these removals. The big thing is visual across, But that wind, that east wind comes across Espola there. As a matter of fact, a fire jumped in that area. And I have a big concern about that. Also, just a quick question. You're not removing natives then, sycamores? This is probably for the West Coast Arbor guy. I'm a 30-year resident. My name is Steve Fleischman. I was on the tree committee when we had one under Tree City status. I watched the Poway oak go down. I watched the Kent sycamore go down, all heritage trees. I would hate to see those removed. But there are real questions here. Could I just make a couple of quick comments?
Can we just answer the questions real quick? Because I don't want to forget them, and I'll forget them if I don't. Yeah, and I'll come back.
So with regards to being a Tree City USA, yes, we are 21 years and still going. With regards to natives, those will not be will not be removed. The mostly are the eucalyptus invasive trees, and then Mike, I think, can answer the next part of your question.
Yeah, as far as the windbreak concept there, it's not every tree. There's definitely, again, we went through the examples of why those trees are being removed, so they're for valid reasons. It's a benefit for fuel as well, but there were some, arborist evaluation insight into that decision for each of those trees. So it's not every single tree. So you're still going to have a stand of eucalyptus. Perhaps it's a little bit more sparse, a little bit better spaced or differently spaced, but it's not every single tree.
And if I could just ask a follow-up question on that. If you've evaluated a tree that has a risk because, say, it has the split trunks at the bottom or something like that, I mean, fundamentally, a tree like that that's serving as a windbreak is also a pretty big risk factor.
The propensity for failure is a lot higher with trees like that, absolutely.
Okay.
Could I make a couple more comments? You did mention bird nesting and how you're not cutting down in certain areas, but by merely removing the trees, you're taking the birds nesting away, including perches for the raptors. You're going to have a big insect and rodent problem in some areas. Just a comment. Also, we're losing clean air. Cities have great concern about their carbon footprint. I'm not a guru on climate change, but nevertheless, it is a concern. You're reducing a lot of leaf space that'll clean the air. And I know I'm a tree hugger. But anyway, I'm also I have some other concerns, and I'll.
Okay, we can come back to them. I would probably assure you that all four of our panelists are also tree huggers too in their own rights, especially Mike as an arborist.
Yeah, just to speak on the carbon side of things, if part of the plan we were talking about is the recycling of the urban wood, that would in essence sequester that carbon. So instead of it being released into the atmosphere, the wood itself could be preserved into being benches for parks and a variety of good uses for that urban wood.
Brock, could you talk about the bird nesting too?
Sure. I wasn't going to just because of comment, but yeah, regarding bird nesting, the main goal, there's sort of, the legal ramifications of avoiding direct take of active bird nests, and so that's what we will be doing, ensuring that happens. The net benefit of removing like all the palms, that's going to remove a lot of rodent activity. Opening it up is going to really make it better habitat for a variety of bird species. We've also been discussing the potential if we see a particular tree that has a lot of apparent cavity nests, for instance, perhaps limbing it and leaving that there so that that's a resource for bird species, and perhaps a log or two that makes sense. But the overall this is going to be a benefit to avian species and most of the native species just by cleaning out all that weedy material.
Yeah, it'll be easier for the hawks to see the rodents on the ground and pick them up, right?
Yeah, some of them, right.
Okay. Was there another question in here? Yes, sir.
I
want to go back to the Green Valley open space area. I was looking at the application for the grant that was submitted back in 2019, and in reading the application and the resolution the council passed, it really seemed to focus on the two corridors, the Twin Peaks Road corridor and the Espola Road corridor, and the application was made to the State Office of Emergency Services, and the grant was issued through the Federal Emergency Management Agency. And it seemed like the emphasis in the use of the funds from this grant was going to be to deal with hazardous conditions along those two roads, which are major evacuation routes, not only for Poway, but for other communities adjoining Poway, including the most direct route to Pomerado Hospital. And so if I misunderstood, let me know, but it sounded like more than half of the trees that were identified for removal are in the Green Valley open space area. And I'm trying to understand better how removing those particular trees addresses the concerns about hazardous conditions along those two major roads that were described in the grant application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in the grant application specifically, just to address your first part of the question, Green Valley wasn't listed specifically as Green Valley. It was Espola East Espola West is how we titled it in the grant application. So you could have missed it. It could be easily missed, obviously, because it wasn't named directly as Green Valley, but it's definitely included in the grant application. Happy to point that out with you. I have a copy in my bag. With regards to the second part of the question, yes, the Green Valley area has approximately like 40% of the trees that were assessed and included in the whole project area. But as part of our process in determining and prioritizing trees, that is a process that we still need to go through, and we will. Keeping in mind we have to balance the environment and public safety. Unfortunately, I don't have a direct answer to your question, but that is a process that we will be going through to how best to utilize the limited money that we do have to balance the public safety within those two corridors, as well as addressing the environmental conditions in this open space. Secondly, again, we won't be able to address all the trees. So as part of our process is developing a program, annual program to maintain the areas in the Green Valley. So anything that can't be addressed through the grant funding will be addressed through an annual operating program.
I guess one thing I'll ask as a follow-up question, does Green Valley not in and of itself has its own fire risk hazards that we're trying to address? I mean, it's wrapped around it's wrapped in between a bunch of communities, and is that a fair statement?
Yes.
Could you clarify your question again?
I was trying to just clarify whether or not the Green Valley area also has its own fire risk that it poses to the community at large, and that some of the mitigation over here would be addressing that fire risk as well.
And I'd like to mention also that we have our interim fire chief here, Scott Post. So after the meeting, if you have any particular questions, I'm sure Scott would be happy to answer them.
Someone asked a question, I think this would be Michael to answer this one, about grinding the trees to the stump. So with that said, because I know that the eucalyptus have that very aggressive root system and the roots go clearly pretty far, because we have had that problem personally in our own yard where the concrete from our foundation has gone up and drains have been cut open by the roots of the eucalyptus. So if you take them to the stump and grind them, will that stop the roots from growing any further? Or?
Yeah, so basically the photosynthetic nature of a tree, the leaves are the food factory of the tree. The tree is a biological system. When you go in and you grind the stump, you take away its ability to feed itself. So a proper grind, any roots that were attached that are still migrating beyond that root zone will not continue on.
Okay. Did I see your hand go up or no? No.
Yes, I want to follow up with this gentleman. Perhaps this is a question that might need to be answered. With any area of the City of Poway with removal of trees, particularly Green Valley, will there be any possible future housing needs met because of removal of trees?
Is the question like it will clear up space that would allow for housing development?
Correct.
I don't think so, no.
Okay.
No.
Other questions? All right. I know my friends on Zoom had questions, so let me give them a chance. Okay. With 62% of the trees removed from Green Valley open space, will this open this area to more people exploring and using these areas, or are these areas ever expected to have more use like hiking and horse trails? I think I don't know is an okay answer, but you're the city nerd, buddy.
No, they're open space, but there's no active trails within these areas. It's not part of our trail system. Answer that question.
So there's no plans related to that?
No, there are no plans for that, yeah.
That's a fair statement. Okay. Let's see. Are there potential problems with using diseased leaves as mulch? I think that's a good Mike question. And actually, I would actually extend that. So diseased leaves that we talked about earlier, or infested tree bark, right? Or the wood with the beetles in it.
Yeah, the beauty of at least they're not necessarily diseased. They could have some pest issues on them. Is that they're already in the process of biodegrading, so they're going to biodegrade even faster. Heat through the mulching process tends to cook out most of the problems. So I don't necessarily see it as a significant problem.
Okay. Will diseased tree wood and mulch be separated from any recyclable wood mulch? Otherwise, homeowners might bring pests back to their property. I guess we just kind of answered that question on the mulching side. Which
and just to speak on this pest, it's everywhere. It's a very, very, very common pest. There's the Eucalyptus Longhorn borer, which is in multiple counties in California. It's not a native pest, but it's an invasive that's got a pretty strong foothold, so it's not a significant issue.
So when you say it's everywhere, meaning it's already surrounding their house somewhere in a tree, most likely in Poway?
Most likely, if they have eucalyptus, there's longhorn borer, there's the lurpsillid, not uncommon at all.
They're already in the neighborhood?
Already there.
Okay. All right. Other questions? Yes, sir. Hang on one second. Oh, that's great.
This is for Brock. Brock, do you know if the Green Valley open space area, it's city-owned open space, do you know if it was acquired by the city through the Multiple Species Conservation Program as open space that it's intended to be preserved as part of the countywide system of open spaces called for in the plan, which the City of Poway has adopted and which the City of Poway is currently implementing?
Yeah, that area is not part of the preserve system.
Okay. Big Hogger?
Sorry, I have a couple more questions. Maybe the arborist or the fellow from that does our tree work can answer this. I had heard that the soil of eucalyptus makes it difficult for replacements. Is that just an urban legend?
To my knowledge, eucalyptus mulch makes for great mulch on a variety of species, so I don't necessarily see that as being an accurate statement.
Oh, so the soil wouldn't preclude planting?
Not necessarily. I mean, it may affect the pH of the soil a little bit, but most of the buffering capacity of local soils should be able to deal with that.
What I would say on replacements, I think we should be looking for trees that eventually don't have to be irrigated. With natives, of course, I know oaks are under threat,
Yeah.
But, are you looking at that?
I know Izzy had mentioned drought-tolerant species were definitely a consideration for part of that replacement plan.
Yeah, as much as possible. I'd also suggest on medians that to preserve trees, you remove shrubs. Because if you're irrigating shrubs to keep green, there's no point in doing that. And also mounding up, which makes runoff on the medians. Are you addressing that?
It's not really within the scope of this
Okay.
project.
And just to follow up on the big eucalyptus, are those coming down? The ones on Espola?
If they met the criteria of, that I had spoke about previously,
Those
there's a
big,
potential
beautiful-
that they'll be on the list for decision-making by the city.
That would be a shame.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the question.
Yeah, it really would be. I would say just, and by the way, you can take out every palm tree as far as I'm concerned. You hate them. They are big fire danger. And as a matter of fact, I think the city should look at an ordinance regarding that. They shouldn't only come out now, they should come out on private property too, not just right-of-ways. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for being here. I will just have to know we're going to have to put an asterisk now next to your tree hugger status for your hatred of the palm trees. So it's conditional. Okay, sorry, I couldn't resist. All right, any other questions? Oh, yeah, excuse me, sir.
Comments, Ryan, that if they want to go hiking in this Green Valley area, it's infested with poison oak. So you want to make sure that when you come out of there, you know what you're up against. And then secondly, Izzy, we're talking about these little volunteers, the little ones. Does the city have authority over the landscape contractor that holds the bid today and holds the contract to say, hey, spend some time and go out there and cut all these things off?
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, there we go. All right, let me, oh, sorry.
Well, the question is, will they? I mean, we need to get those things out of there because they grow real fast.
And we're, to answer your question, you know, we have city staff, you know, our landscape maintenance district specialists addressing those volunteers. So both from, aside from the landscape contractor, our city staff is addressing that.
Okay. Sorry. Oh, my apologies. Hang on. Just want to clarify that. That would be funding restrained as far as that's concerned because of monies in the LMD to do that, correct? To remove those.
That's correct. So any direction to a landscape contractor to remove volunteers would come out of that respective budget for tree removal.
Okay. So, let's see, I had one, actually, I think we'll address it here. So, first of all, thank you all very much for coming out tonight and asking me excellent questions. This was very helpful. The nice thing is, by asking all these great questions, they're now on the record, because you were kind enough to let me record them here with a microphone. And please tell your friends and neighbors about this event being recorded. It'll be available online, somewhere on the city website in the near future. If you've signed up for information, there's an email list, I think, for this. Can you tell the audience how to stay connected in this project, Izzy?
There we go. Yes. Okay. So on the, if you're interested in following the progress of this project, we have a dedicated webpage on city's website, tree removal project. I think hyphenated at the end of the cityofpoway.org. Also, we have an email address on that webpage. If you email us and you want to be on the listserv, we'll keep you updated as the project continues. So yes.
Okay, and so for our friends on Zoom, if you all could paste a link to the website link in there, that would be great, just for our folks on Zoom to make sure they find that. And then Tony, is this still on? No. Just leave that bad boy on until I'm done with my inquisition here. There you go, Tony, sorry. How do people make sure they stay in contact with you and what's going on with the lighting and the landscape maintenance district?
Right, so our volunteer advisory group also has a website, and you can get more information on that back at the table back there, and you can also get on our mailing list, and we will send periodic updates on the activities of the Landscape Maintenance District Advisory Group as we collaborate with the city to move forward, not just on the trees, but on the landscape master plan and ways to fund it in perpetuity.
Okay, very good. All right, well, with that, we're going to bring it to a close. Thank you again all very much for being out here tonight. Thank you to the folks back home that are watching. My thanks to my panel of nerds up here for being amazing and awesome with the great answers. Have a great night. Be safe, everyone.